Will the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for Wednesday, February 6, 2019, please come to order? For the benefit of those who may not have participated in a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, our procedures are as follows. 1, the Secretary will read the legal call of the meeting as published in the local newspapers. 2, the applicant will be invited to come forward and present the case, explaining to the Commission and others present what is being requested of this property. Comments of town agencies will be read for each application if there are any. There will be clarifying questions from the Commissioners. 3, there will then be an opportunity for clarifying questions from the audience. First, those who wish to support the application may come forward, and second, those who oppose the application will then be invited to come forward. As this is a public hearing, it must be recorded. It is necessary for speakers to identify themselves, state their name and address before addressing the Commission. 4, the applicant is then free to leave or remain for the balance of the public hearing and the regular meeting, at which time the Commission will try and reach a decision on each application. Each applicant will be notified in writing as to the decision of this Commission and has the right to appeal to Superior Court if desired. Decisions of this meeting are available the day after the meeting by calling the Planning and Zoning Office, 453-8039, after 9 a.m. Seated this evening are the following: Sean Cosgrove, Matt Yerzinski, Richard Wallace, I'm Phil Johnson, Frank DeAndrea, Alan Brown, Scott Edmond, Jason Marchi, and we have a new member that is not here, Michael Basso. We'll hope to have him at the next meeting. Staff present is George Kral, Town Planner, Aaron Manick, Zoning Enforcement, Lisa Piambino is our Secretary, and Peter Schultz is our videographer. Secretary will now read the legal notice.
Notice is hereby given that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing on February 6, 2019 at 7:30 p.m. in the Nathaniel B. Green Community Center, 32 Church Street, Guilford, Connecticut, in the Monunketuck Room on the second floor for the following purposes. Proposed amendment to the zoning code, RE lots without required frontage. Amend 273-15 by adding the following. Quote, lots which are non-conforming with respect to required minimum lot frontage shall not be considered interior lots as defined in 273-25A, and additions to dwellings on said lots and accessory buildings are allowed in accordance with this section. Proposed amendment to the subdivision code regarding fee in lieu of land for open space. Amend Guilford Subdivision Code 272-41D, fee in lieu of lands as follows. Subsection 1, where dedication of land as open space will not meet the purposes of this section, the Commission will require that the developer/applicant pay a fee to the town or pay a fee and transfer land to the town or other acceptable entities in lieu of any requirement to provide land. Subsection 3, if approved by the Commission, a fee in lieu of land shall be paid to the Land Acquisition Fund of the town in accordance with Section 8-25 of the Connecticut General Statutes as amended. Amend Subdivision Code 272-41 by deleting subsection 2, subsection D, quote, some other arrangement. Copies of these applications are available for inspection in the office of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Town Hall South, 50 Boston Street, Guilford, Connecticut. At this hearing, persons may attend and be heard, and written communications will be received. Robert Mangino, Boston Post Road, map 84, lots 11-1, 11-2, and 11-4, request for zoning map change from R5 to TS2. Dated at Guilford, Connecticut, this 12th day of December 2018. Philip Johnson, Chairman.
Would someone like to make a motion to open the meeting?
The third item there, that was mistakenly advertised. That's not to be held this meeting. It's to be held on the 20th of February.
That is to be received.
We've already received it, but it was inadvertently advertised for today, and that's not correct.
Okay.
If anybody's here for that.
You can leave. Would someone like to make a motion to open the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
George, could you run point in terms of explaining our first item on the public hearing for the proposed amendment to the zoning code, RE lots without required frontage?
Yeah, Aaron's going to try to do that.
Run point on this one, Aaron.
Okay. This, I have included in your packets, the section of non-conforming lots, 273-15, and the area, section F, which we're looking to add an amendment. This covers, throughout town, we've had a few examples come up where we have legally non-conforming lots that are undersized for zone, whether it be through a zoning change in the area where we've come across lots that now do not meet the current frontage requirements for the road. Our description of an interior lot in section 273-25 states that an existing or newly created lot having no frontage or insufficient frontage on a street may be used for the purposes and subject to the limitations set forth below. Basically, in having lots that do not have adequate frontage, they are now considered interior lots. They have more restrictive setbacks. We've had a few over the last several months come before the Zoning Board of Appeals seeking variance of these setbacks. So we were looking for a way of trying to eliminate this need to obtain variances, the setback variances. I have a couple of examples how this has come up. We tried to make this work so that it didn't affect truly interior lots that were created by subdivision, because those lots should have the setbacks that were required at the time of that subdivision. So in writing this, we have excluded planned residential developments, open space subdivisions, and other types of developments that have been approved previously by special permits. We've also, in subdivisions, we have considered interior lots on private roads and right-of-ways, and so that's where this description of a minimum of 50 feet on a town road comes into play. There's been a little bit of question whether this actually encompasses exactly and doesn't create any other issues in town. But we figured we'd open up the public hearing and see if we have any public comments on that. We can get some other ideas from towns as far as definitions of interior lots. So if you'd like, I'll show you a couple of examples where this has come up.
You had mentioned that applicants had gone before the ZBA in the
Right.
past.
So
Have any
here-
of those been turned down?
Portions of the variances had been withdrawn due to it looking like they would have been turned down. So I only have one map of this one. This is an example on Old Sachems Head Road where this is an R5 zone. Still has quite a bit of frontage on the road, but is not exactly what is required for an R5. This thereby requiring that we have 50-foot setbacks on all sides. The lot is way oversized for the zone, but yet has more restrictive setbacks.
Did we change the zoning on this one?
No, they received a variance
No.
to rebuild this
Is this
house.
one of the ones that was
This is one
impacted
that
by
was- This is one that was impacted by this regulation, and, when looking for a pool, those have to follow setbacks of main structures, and when putting a pool before the Zoning Board of Appeals, they looked at that unfavorably. And so the pool portion of the application was withdrawn because they felt that was increasing non-conforming. So some of these lots, rather than just being considered legally non-conforming with less frontage for the road, you still have to maintain the setbacks that are required in that zone, even though you have less frontage. But But now you're putting on an additional.
So if it's a non-conforming lot, an
Right,
approved
so
non-conforming lot, you have additional restrictions that are imposed upon it?
greater setbacks.
J-
Well,
Purely
greater
because,
setbacks
purely because of the frontage?
Because it lacks the frontage that's required. So here's another example. This was up on County Road, 150 feet of frontage. It's now an R8 zone. The lot was created, it was an R5 zone. The house was built for the setbacks at the time,
So it was rezoned from
correct?
8 to 5?
It was rezoned from 5
5
to
to
8,
8.
which is greater setbacks. So rather than looking at this as an undersized lot that still has to maintain the setbacks of an R8 zone, now the way the regulations are written, this is considered an interior lot and has even greater setbacks of a 50-foot setback on all sides. So we were looking for a way that didn't add that additional burden on some lots that truly, whether they predated zoning or the zoning map was amended, but we are hoping not to affect lots that truly have been approved as interior lots.
So if someone wanted to redevelop a new interior lot, would we be removing the frontage requirement?
No, because it would be the, this definition, or this amendment would be effective as of the date of approval by the commission, and new lots created would just continue to comply with the setbacks for that zone. You still are allowed to create interior lots.
But are we waiving the frontage requirements on interior lots?
No, this would only apply to
No.
lots that have existing houses on them.
Okay.
Right, not new subdivisions, and not
just wanna-
not vacant lots on old subdivisions, because those are protected by the statutes as well.
So this is merely for
These are
current
for
structures
current
on
structures.
non-conforming lots?
Current lots on town roads with a minimum of 50 feet of frontage that are currently developed.
So
Yes.
what was the application for this one, do you recall?
This one was a straightforward zoning, building permit for a rear deck on the property, and the house would have met it actually would have met the R8 zone requirements of a 20-foot setback, but because it lacks the 200 feet of frontage and only has 150, it's considered an interior lot, and they cannot put that deck. They
Without going to
without
ZBA.
applying to the zoning board of appeals.
And so when someone goes to the ZBA, what is the procedure? They have to bring,
They are required to have an E2 survey,
okay, any
which
idea?
would be an additional expense to the property owner. You look at a deck that you're looking to spend, a few $1,000s on, you're going to
Just
spend.
didn't have frontage, because it didn't have the frontage, they couldn't put the pool in, because it was not meeting the standards? Is that
So-
what you're saying? So they had
Right,
enough
so-
room to put the pool in, right, because of the size of the lot?
They have enough lot area.
But they were refused
For the
because of the
zone.
frontage, because they were an interior lot.
Correct. The zoning board of appeals then looks at these structures now as legally non-conforming, and adding on to them is an expansion of a non-conforming structure, and
I know the state doesn't like that.
they're not keen on
On interior lots, you mentioned common drives and
Right, so some of
Yeah.
those are true interior lots. There are, we have a number of subdivisions.
Right.
We have a number of historic subdivisions. The subdivision regulations used to allow for multiple houses off of one access way. That has been reduced over the years to three houses to be accessed by one drive, but they're all considered interior lots, and those would continue to be considered interior lots.
but there wouldn't be any regs to say setback from that common drive or anything.
There are setbacks in the zoning code. That would be considered, whether it was a property line, they would still have a setback from the property line or from a right-of-way, whichever one of those is more restrictive. That will still.
It wouldn't
come in.
eliminate that interior lot restriction on those lots, because those lots don't have 50 feet of frontage on a town road.
Right.
So they would continue to be considered interior lots and would have to meet the interior lot setback requirements. Only if the lot has 50 feet of frontage on a town road would it qualify for this exemption.
And it varies, that interior setback varies from zone to zone. The most restrictive is a 50-foot setback. That would be for R5s, R6s, and anything larger. Some of the more denser areas, it could be a 20-foot or 30-foot setback on all sides.
But the interior lot setbacks are always greater than the standard setbacks, regardless of the zone that the property's in.
And I think that was partly when allowing interior lots. Those greater setbacks were established, thinking these are more, a development in your backyard or something where you'd want to create that buffer between properties.
Clarifying questions from commissioners?
Good job.
Would anybody in the audience, like to ask any questions or step up? Mr. Grigsby? Please come up, state your name.
David Grigsby, 37 Union Street.
You want to speak in front of the mic? It helps people who are...
This is the question. All right.
Okay.
All right, well, I'll start with a question. What's the 50-foot frontage? Where is that requirement coming in?
We used that definition. We created the 50-foot
Say again?
frontage requirement specifically for this exception, so as not to allow this exemption for lots that were created on private roads. They would still be considered interior lots as far as the setback requirements.
Right, but where's the 50-foot?
Why 50 feet rather than
No,
25?
where is the 50-foot language? I'm just asking that.
In the draft?
Okay, you don't have the most recent draft.
Here, David.
The
Did
draft,
you notice the current draft?
well, we noticed, no, we did not.
Ah.
But we don't have to notice the whole text of the zoning
All right,
amendment.
so wait, is this the,
That
That's-
yellow
yes,
language,
yes.
that yellow
Okay.
is what is proposed in
All
the
right.
regulation.
No wonder you're
Okay.
confused, David.
yeah, that's the start.
Yes. The whole thing, the whole issue and the whole construct of how this is written is definitely confusing.
So, to clarify, the current interior lots have a setback greater than 50 feet?
50 feet is the maximum, is the interior lot setback for R5, R6, R7, and R8 zones. The other zones, R3, R4, I think the interior lot setback is 20 feet in those zones. But it's uniform around the whole perimeter of the lot, which is distinct from most other zones where you have a different setback for the rear property line and the side property line. The standard setbacks for interior lots, you have this uniform setback all the way around inside the perimeter. And it's always greater than the other setback, based on the premise that Aaron explained, that interior lots were more likely to create, privacy impacts on standard lots.
A typical R5 lot, that would be considered a lot with frontage now, that if you have that minimum of 125 feet of frontage, then you would have a side, the closest you could get to one side would be 20 feet, and then you'd make up a 30-foot setback on the other side. So if you're just short of, or just shy of that 150 feet, then your setbacks jump to 50 feet on all sides.
If in the future there's changes to the zoning, whether an R5 goes to an R8, or there's changes to the lot frontage requirements, is it your intent in this to have those then qualify for this exemption?
They wouldn't, because
Only
only
for-
lots with houses existing as of the effective date of this
Okay.
would qualify for this exemption.
I don't recall, what was and you can say, I don't know, what was the reasoning behind changing the zoning? And thereby increasing these requirements on homeowners?
Well, the most significant change in zoning occurred in 1978, when the so-called R8 zone was created. And most of the undeveloped area of the town east side, west side, and north of Route 80 was zoned R8. And so there were many lots developed under earlier zoning which became non-conforming in various respects because the R8 zone created the 4-acre minimum lot size, the 200 feet of frontage required, which was much greater than anything existing prior to 78. So a lot of the non-conforming issues that we're dealing with today came about as a result of that 1978 rezoning and making a lot of the lots that were pre-existing to that non-conforming in one respect or another.
Yes.
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 And I am here in this section in my capacity as a concerned citizen of the town of Guilford. And later we'll be talking in another capacity. The other question I have, this is much better than the original language. In section D, 273-15D, that is construction of accessory buildings. You don't have this qualifying language there. Did you deliberately do that? Did you mean to do it in two different places? What do you think?
Except as limited by subsection C and G, nothing in these regulations shall prevent the construction.
That's just my personal
Let's see.
Would anyone like to speak?
Yeah, because accessories.
Well, this doesn't deal just with the issue of preventing the construction of the accessory building. Well, no, I guess it includes alternate. We didn't mean to distinguish between accessory buildings and principal buildings. We mean to treat them.
If it's a non-interior lot, if it's a previously existing non-conforming lot that has 50 feet of frontage and it needed 80 feet of frontage, you want to be able to, interior lot setbacks will not apply to a single-family dwelling and to their...
Right, we want to treat them all uniformly, right. So maybe it's perhaps necessary to amend D also. We'll have to take a look at that.
Asking the question.
Yeah, we don't intend to restrict, we didn't intend to treat them differently, I don't think. Let me say that we do plan on recommending to the commission that you continue the hearing on this because we do, well, for one, you are required, you're required to have a second public hearing anyway, but rather than waive that, we are still researching how other towns deal with this, and maybe we can come up with an easier, kind of simpler way of handling it, but we're not expecting to resolve any of these issues or questions right now.
Please.
I'm sorry, the other added wrinkle, and I was handing it back to you. You said that interior lots are defined in 25.
They're not. They're not. That's one of my other questions, is whether or not I should add a clear definition of what it is.
I think it makes sense to continue, but I'll throw it out if anyone would like to speak in support or against the application. That being said, would someone like to make a motion to continue?
I'll move to continue.
Second, to February 20th.
To February 20th. All in favor? We'll see you on the 20th regarding that one. Moving right along. Aaron?
No, I'm gonna do it.
George, you going to take this one?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the proposed amendment to subdivision code regarding
understand
fee
this.
in lieu of land for open space. Why are we talking about this?
We've talked about this quite a bit, as you know. Also, it's easier to understand the proposed text if you have this version of the proposed text.
Proposed version different than the
Yes,
notice?
a little bit.
I have copies.
Substantively,
Oh.
no. There's really only one substantive change in this proposal. Well, no, I'm sorry, there's two. But it's easier to understand the whole thing in the context of the full regulation if you look at it in this version, which has the strikeouts and the yellow and the red and all that, or at least the yellow. The first part of this, well, let me just back up.
Can you show that?
You all know that in subdivisions, Connecticut law allows us to require 10% of the land area of the proposed subdivision to be set aside as open space. That
allowance, that authorization of authority has been,
It's in the statutes, I have a copy.
we have a copy of the whole text of that, just to pass around, not to get into all of this too much detail, but we're allowed to require open space as part of subdivision developments. Open space can typically take the form of a grant of land from the proposed subdivision to the town or to the land trust or some other entity. It can take the form of some type of easement or restriction in the development of the property. And also pursuant to Connecticut law, it can take the form of a fee in lieu of land subdivision, land donation. That's what we want to talk about tonight. The first part of this proposal is the part you see on the front page of this under General A2D. We, in drafting this, we had proposed, and this had been discussed by the zoning committee, that we eliminate the provision for requiring easements as a form of open space dedication. So this particular text eliminates that option for satisfying the open space requirement. That's sort of incidental from and not really related to the primary purpose of this, which is to revise the language that's on the second and third page of this text under D, fee in lieu of. Our current language says that where dedication of land as open space will not meet the purposes of this section, that is, say, dedication of 10% or more of the land area. The commission, under our current regulations, says may request that the developer applicant pay a fee to the town. We're proposing to revise that language to say will require. So making it clear that we have the authority to actually require a payment in lieu of open space of 10%. The second and third subparagraphs of this proposed text talk a little bit more about how that fee is actually established and where the money goes. Under 2, we add language to that section that reads, unless otherwise agreed to by the commission and the applicant, the procedures for determining the amount of any fee in lieu of open space shall be in accordance with 8-25 of the Connecticut General Statutes as amended, provided that any required appraisal shall be performed by a Connecticut licensed appraiser who has been certified as a member of the Appraisal Institute. The Connecticut law specifies that the way the fee is established is through the hiring of an appraiser who determines the market value of the property prior to development, or in this case subdivision, and that the fee is then equal to 10% of whatever that value is. A number of towns have included the language which we are proposing to include here, which says, unless otherwise agreed to by the commission and the applicant, the procedures for determining the amount, blah, blah, blah. The reason we're recommending that is that in the case, especially of proposed open space subdivision developments where the fee in lieu of is likely to be a fairly small amount of money, meaning $10,000, $5,000, something in that range, the cost of doing the appraisal seems excessive in relation to what the total benefit is going to be in terms of the fee, and that there ought to be a provision, we think, for the applicant and the commission to agree on an alternative method. And in fact, this is the method that that we have used over the years in the relatively few cases where we've actually done a fee in lieu of. We've applied 10% to the appraised value that the assessor, that the town of Guilford assessor has on the property. So obviating the need to hire an appraiser on each individual circumstance, we use the appraisal that the town has done as part of the appraisal that the tax assessor and the tax collector have put on the property. So that obviates the need to have that other step and hire an appraiser. So we're proposing that. And then the third part of this is that we describe in more detail what Connecticut General Statutes allows us to do, and that is to make the fee payable rather than in one lump sum by the applicant. It can be made in partial payments based on the timeliness of the sale of individual lots, so that the applicant subdivider is not faced with a lump sum fee in the front end of the development process. They can pay it in installments as they sell or develop and sell individual lots. So that's the language that's highlighted in yellow under Section 3.
And the fees that are collected go to?
They go to the into the town's land acquisition fund, which is then used for purchase of other open
More
space.
desirable locations than?
Right. So that's the substance of this proposal.
So what used to happen before when the land of open space didn't meet the purposes of the section, but the developer didn't want to pay a fee? So how would the difference get settled?
Either we didn't require any open space at all, or more frequently, where there was no real land to be set aside that made sense for anybody. Nobody really wanted to set aside of land that the land trust wasn't interested in it, the town wasn't interested in it. One way of satisfying the open space requirement would be through some kind of a deed restriction or an easement on a portion of the property, typically an easement on a portion of the property that was environmentally sensitive, which would restrict or prohibit the development of that portion of the property.
But the impetus for this was really just to tighten up the language to remove ambiguity, so that anyone considering developing land would have some foreknowledge, some expectation of a fee versus that the commission or some other entity may require.
Well, we typically would have a discussion where we wanted to, we being the staff, wanted or thought that a fee in lieu of might be appropriate. We would have a conversation with the subdivider, developer, applicant, and suggest that we really wanted that was the best way of doing this. We didn't make it totally clear to them that we were just recommending it, although if they read the language of the section of the subdivision regulation, it clearly says may request, which implies that if you don't have to accept the request, you could say, no, I don't want it. But we sometimes didn't make that abundantly clear, and some applicants, I think, we've had some recent examples of this, thought that it was required, and that may have been the way I kind of presented it to them. So we wanted to make it abundantly clear through this language, which has been vetted, as you know, by town council. The idea of a mandatory requirement has been vetted by Chuck Andrus, as you know, we've discussed that before. He thinks we can do this, we have the authority. So this is to make abundantly clear that we will and can do it.
Either you give the land or you give the fee.
Yeah, I mean, it's still possible that you would waive open space altogether, but why would we ever really want to do that or recommend that? Maybe there may be some circumstances where you don't want to require any open space at all, but most likely, if there's no land that's suitable for set-aside and fee, then we would seek to obtain the fee in lieu of.
Actually, what we're saying is that if this piece of property is going to be surrounded by houses with no advantage to the public to get into, to be able to use it, why would we want to have that property back to us?
Right.
So rather than that, they have to pay the difference if they're going to build that property.
They have to pay a fee in lieu of, which is used to purchase open space somewhere else that the residents of that development can
So if
use
there's
and
no
enjoy.
advantage to the town, then there's no reason why we're gonna get stuck with the property, because we wouldn't be able to use it.
Well, over the years, we've moved away from small exactions of little pieces of property that ended up being sort of orphaned. Nobody really wanted to take care of them, they didn't benefit anybody. We also, from time to time, historically, encouraged the creation of sort of bogus homeowners associations that might own these little pieces of land, which then really weren't benefit to anybody. The homeowners association didn't really want it or take care of it very well, so we've moved away from that. But we wanted to firmly establish the idea of fee in lieu of as a method that we could require if the other methods turn out to be not advantageous or desirable.
Any more clarifying questions from commissioners?
Being at the zoning commission, it's the zoning subcommittee, this is the same discussion we basically had. And so we've, in the past, I have recollection of some pieces that nobody's going to want out of any development, or it serves no useful purpose.
Are there any questions from the audience members? Attorney Grigsby. It would be helpful for people that want to see you on TV and hear you clearly.
Borrow your desk space again. David Grigsby, 37 Union Street. In this case, I am speaking in my capacity as president of the Guilford Land Conservation Trust. We own 3,000 acres of open space in Guilford, and I guess my question is, can you re-articulate to me the motivation for the deletion of the language in 27241A2D about some other arrangement, including protective easement, trail easement, conservation easement? What's our motivation for taking that out?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think we should, I personally don't think we should take that out.
Okay. How did it get taken out?
I think when the zoning committee discussed it, there may have been, the zoning committee may have thought we should eliminate the easements as an option. But I think maybe in thinking about it further, I don't know why. Maybe because it's such an easy option in some cases to, put these easements and/or variations on an easement, deed restrictions, that we sometimes would do that as a kind of fallback and not require the fee in lieu of because we felt uncomfortable about requiring the fee in lieu of. That could be the rationale for it.
One of the issues that I think people have faced with deed restrictions is that the town's not going to enforce them. So it's incumbent upon abutting neighbors, if they are so inclined, to enforce deed restrictions. And I guess one of the questions is, are we going to impose that burden upon abutting neighbors? And I know I'm asking you a question, but this is your specialty as well.
Well, certainly the issue of who is going to enforce the easement can be a bit of a challenge. I mean, technically speaking, you may be deeded the open space, but then somebody might be parking their car on the open space. So you still have to go and enforce your rights on it. It doesn't make the issue of trespass or encroachment or misuse go away entirely, but at least it does mean you technically would own the land. But in the comment section, I will talk about how I think taking out the language about conservation easements is maybe not the most well thought through proposal here. The other question, George, when you were talking, you mentioned that sometimes the commission may just waive the entire open space and/or fee in lieu requirement. That is a 3/4 requirement approval still, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so
It's not listed as an option.
It's not just perfunctory.
That
It would require a
still
3/4.
remains. the requirement may be waived by a 3/4 vote of the
Right.
commission in accordance with the following
Right,
standards.
so it's not just a majority, it's a three-quarter.
Right, yeah.
Right.
And Chuck, or Attorney Andrus, was okay with the will require language?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, to me, it struck me as an unnecessary change, because it's clear the statute says thou shalt provide a 10% open space. The town may decide to request a fee in lieu. I didn't think that was ambiguous language, but if you think Attorney Andrus is comfortable with will require, then that's good enough for me, and that's the last of my questions
Okay.
right now.
Oh, you want to just stay there and
I don't know.
make comments in support or against?
Or against?
We'll just break procedure and let you go wherever you like.
All right. Probably the most significant concern I have is the deletion of the 272-41A 2D conservation easement or a trail easement may in fact be the best solution in lieu of, or instead of simply either A, the developer gives us a chunk of property or gives the town a chunk of property, or B, money changes hands. I can think of an instance off of Three Corners Road where the land trust has an easement across somebody's driveway to get to trails on Westwoods. It would be difficult to manage that where the land trust owned the driveway, then the property owner had the driveway across. Having a trail easement is a perfect way of addressing or enabling having open space. So I would strongly recommend against taking out that language, particularly now that George has expressed that he's not entirely clear how it got in there to be taken out.
I don't think, I recall the meeting, and I don't know that we had been explicit about having all the language taken out, but we recognized that easements were a slippery and not an ideal approach,
I think Phil's-
in a blanket sense.
I think Phil's comments sort of reminded me in my mind how that all came about, but maybe there's a better way of writing it, retaining the concept without creating this unnecessary enforcement idea.
One of my other concerns with the language, if we're going to be in the business of revising the open space section of the subdivision regulations, one of the things that concerns me about the section 272-41D1, where you're going to change it to will require, is the beginning of the sentence where it says, where dedication of land as open space will not meet the purposes of this section. According to who or whom? I think it's whom. Who? Where's my mother when I need her? Anyway, if you're telling me that people were concerned about the ambiguity of they are required to dedicate open space, but the town could instead request money, I can see a developer saying, well, I think open space is a perfectly lovely idea here, and it doesn't say who decides that dedication of land is not meeting the purposes of the section. I would recommend language along the lines of, in the commission's discretion, that it's the commission that decides whether it's been met or not. You could probably look at the Branford land regulations on open space, because they have in their language that talks about that the zoning commission would consult with other entities, either, what? No? I've got a copy of that.
I can pass around a copy of Branford's.
Because they have language that talks about that the commission should consult with either land acquisition, Guilford Land Trust, Conservation Commission, any number of people, so that you're not sitting here behind this desk saying, I don't know what's a good idea here. You might learn something from, right, you may learn something from somebody who has more information, who'd say, you know what, a trail easement would be great, because then we could get to fill in the blank. So I think adding language that talks about how you would maybe consult with other town entities is a good idea. Oh, and I think the Branford regulations also actually talk about what those standards would be, so that when it says here that it would, dedication of open space doesn't meet the purposes of the section doesn't really actually articulate its purposes well. So maybe some added language that talks about why open space is a good idea, and what should be considered in terms of evaluating whether an open space is meeting those purposes or is in fact an orphan piece of property that nobody wants and nobody loves. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Bill, I have a staff memo here. Didn't make it into the files.
Well, would you please read it?
That's why I'm here.
Which go to some of David's concerns he just addressed there. So, to the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission, from Kevin McGee, Environmental Planner. We propose amendment to subdivision code section 272-41D, fee in lieu of land. The proposed subdivision amendment, section 272-41D, fee in lieu of land, is written to clarify that the Planning and Zoning Commission is responsible for determining the need to receive fee in lieu of land instead of accepting the open space or other arrangements. In recent years, developers have deeded to the town and the town land trust small pieces of land that do not connect to other open space properties and do not provide conservation value. By having a fee in lieu of land payments placed in the land acquisition fund, the town could purchase land of higher conservation value. The removal of section 2D to eliminate conservation easements could create a conflict with the recommendations of the Wetlands Commission to have protective easements along high-quality wetlands area. Sections 2D should be updated to allow only for conservation easements in areas deemed appropriate by the Wetlands Commission and the Conservation Commission. Clarifying the fee in lieu land sections of the regulations is the first step of updating the open space section of the regulations. The current layout of the open space subdivision code is confusing to developers, and that does not provide a clear process of determining the appropriateness of accepting the land and the process of review by the town commission and or land trust. Section 272-41B, dedication of land, 1F, indicates that the land can be granted as open space to the town of Guilford, including its Park and Recreation Commission, Conservation Commission, or other town agencies, and to recognize private organizations legally constituted to accept and maintain land for conservation and or recreation purposes such as a land trust. The only board which the regulation requires comments back from is the Board of Selectmen, who vote on a recommendation the town accept such land. The regulation does not require a letter from the land trust indicating that they would accept the land. Open space regulations in towns in area towns provide a section in the regulations which indicate that the Planning and Zoning Commission solicits comments from the Conservation Commission, Inland Wetlands Commissions, Park and Recreation Commission, Land Acquisition Commission, and the Land Trust regarding the best methods of preserving open space. The comments from these commissioners are designed to assist the Planning and Zoning Commission in evaluating the open space, and if portions of the subdivision should be protected as open space or in fee in lieu of land should be provided to the town and placed into a dedicated open space fund. Guilford's current open space subdivision regulations do not provide a clear description of the appropriateness of open space. Section 272-41B, dedication of land 1B, provides 8 qualities of why the Commission can waive the requirements for allowing dedicated open space to be located on a greater percentage of area classified as wetlands, watercourses, 100-year floodplain, or slopes in excess of 25% than the parcel as a whole. This section of regulations should be labeled as appropriateness of open space and list the 8 qualities of open space that should be protected for. Without clear regulations indicating the qualities of open space, what commissions and groups advise the Planning and Zoning Commission on appropriateness of the open space area and the need to accept the land or take a fee in lieu of land, the other sections of the open space regulations remain confusing and unorganized. I recommend the Planning and Zoning Commission that Section 272-41 Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Land be reviewed by the Planning Committee for additional updating.
Thank you.
I was just going to suggest either the zoning, because of all the suggestions we have tonight, to take this back to the zoning committee and probably refine it.
As a matter of procedure, do we want to continue? Do we want to close?
Anybody else to talk?
Would anyone else? What? Oh, my apologies, Mr. McKelney.
Some people have comments.
Okay.
I would make one comment real quick. If we were to, if we were to keep this section 272-41, A to D, if we were to keep it, then it doesn't necessarily make sense for us to then require a fee in lieu of, as we're making the change here. If we're giving ourselves the opportunity to have a trail easement or conservation easement, then the wording should be a little bit different, and not necessarily to say will require, because if we're coming up with another option, then we're not necessarily requiring a fee.
I'm not sure I understand why
So
you're saying.
we're saying that we're going to change where dedication of land to open space will not meet the purposes of this section, the commission will require to pay a fee. But if we're going to keep the wording of some other arrangement shall be found by the commission, then it doesn't if we keep that part, then it seems to me that we shouldn't necessarily require a fee.
Keep the wording as is.
As may require, I mean.
Well,
Or slightly tweak the
no,
wording.
I don't think so,
The
because
easement could be a dedication in a way.
I think the
it's not the intent.
I think the Commissioner's comment is that where dedication of open space will not meet the purposes, the Commission will require
Right.
a fee. What he's saying is that it might not be a dedication of open space if it's a trail easement or a conservation easement. I
Right.
think he just wants to tweak that
Okay.
wording.
If we end up keeping the section 2D that we've been talking about potentially keeping, then you might want to pay attention to the fact that we have that when we're talking about this will require language.
So as a point of clarity, if there is not 10% of land that they want to give up, is the easement worth the fee in lieu of? I mean, are we now making the decision as to the qualitative value of the easement versus the fee?
I think that's what Kevin and Mr. Grigsby are actually saying. It's good, ultimately, it's the commission's decision, but we want to make sure that you get all the input that's useful before you make that decision, including from the various agencies. But the intent would be, under the will require option, that you've also rejected 2D. That's one of the options. And if you reject A, B, C, D, then you will require the fee in lieu of. I think that's the intent.
Is the possible, maybe unintended result of prolonging the process by lots of stakeholders involved, getting input to the commission, just that it elongates the process for any developer, whether it's small or large, that might require an open space issue? Okay.
It shouldn't really. I mean, I guess it's conceivable that if we want the opinion of the Conservation Commission, for example, that, and they don't meet for another, 5 weeks, it may delay the process conceivably, but, it's perhaps a small price to pay. Hopefully, most of these issues of design of the subdivision, which is really what this revolves around, takes place, preliminarily at the staff level. I mean, it's not like we don't consult with these agencies now.
Right, before they,
But we're just making it more explicit that we're going to, and sort of formalizing what we're going to. And they, I guess it's conceivable that all that consultation could delay the process a little bit, but.
Currently in our regulation, which we've been admitting, is that before they even come to this commission, they should be going to the Board of Selectmen and other groups to get their approvals, or talking with them to say, we want to give this open space land to you guys, are you willing to accept that? And have all that worked out before they come and make an application to this board, because that should be part of the application of applying. So once it's all together, then it comes to this board and it becomes a clean process. But it shouldn't come to us and say, oh, you're missing this, and now you need to spend a month to go to meet these other groups there. So that's part of the process of cleaning up the regulations there, so they see in a clearer flow that you need to talk with this group and get this commission stuff before you get approval from this board here.
Gary, would you like to stand up, state your name and address for the record, and make a comment?
Or two. Gary McElhenney, 411 Norton Town Road. I come with a perspective of 12 years of Land Acquisition Commission, 8 years of selectmen, and my new mistake, the Facilities Task Force, all of which come into play. But we have, over the years, acquired through development programs, as people have mentioned, orphan pieces which are inaccessible. I mean, I also ought to mention I'm a former board member of the Land Trust, but there are pieces that should go to the town, there are pieces that should go to the Land Trust and are appropriate, but we have a whole lot of orphan pieces that have been created through situations such as these. They're difficult to manage, if not impossible. They're a liability to the town to own them and not be able to manage them. Some of them are literally dangerous. Developers aren't overly generous. They give us pieces that they can't utilize, or the people that are taking the lots can't utilize. So they're at 45 degrees, rocky, down into water. So these have all accumulated, and if we can prevent that and take some cash in, that would be appropriate. I would also mention, as pointed out to me by my friend Mr. Lightsey here, that on page 2 of the subdivision code, there is a pretty good definition of what's appropriate. Provide open space which is contiguous with other space, provide walking, hiking, or biking trails, protect special wetland areas, prevent land for stormwater management, protect scenic views. So you do actually, in the current regulations, have some pretty good definitions of what is appropriate for open space. So if we could eliminate some of these problems, and I mentioned the Facilities Task Force because at my last presentation to the Board of Selectmen, they asked us to see what we could do about getting rid of all of these small orphan properties. Jason can bring the map to the next meeting, and you can see how many there actually are that the town owns, what I would call useless properties. So if we can prevent that from happening, that would be a worthwhile thing. If we could add cash to the Land Acquisition Fund, that would be even better.
Does anyone else have any additional comments?
Just the observation that the standards that Gary just mentioned are actually in the section that talks about where the 25%, where the developer is not supposed to just give us terrible, crappy land that's underwater and full of rocks. Those are then, that requirement is then accepted out if certain other purposes are met. So those purposes may be a good guide, but as drafted, they are not currently something that says whether open space is, whether a proposed open space parcel is successful and fulfills the purposes or does not. So those words are probably borrowed. You might need to put in another section.
Right.
And Kevin quickly mentioned, just as a point of observation, there's a statute. You can't give land to the land trust without the land trust signing the deed.
Saying you want it.
Correct.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a $500 fine and some terrible thing happens to you. So it's not unlike the town, you can't just give land to the land trust. So if we're going to be involved in the discussion, we're going to have to be involved.
And it was mentioned a couple of times, the Land Acquisition Commission does exist to review these ahead of time and help determine whether they're appropriate or not. So, I mean, the town has a facility, the land trust has a facility to review these and say, this is appropriate or it isn't appropriate.
Right, well, what I was going to suggest is
Back
we...
and forth here, and I guess...
Right, well,
questions.
what I'm going to suggest is that we kick it back to the zoning committee and to George and Aaron
To see if we can clean this up. There's been some great suggestions presented. And I think we all kind of had the same end goal, but I think we want to make it a clean process with as little ambiguity as possible.
Just so I want to ask a question.
You're welcome to do that.
Well, thank Are you saying that it should go to the selectman's office to make the decision as to whether we're going to want it, and then it comes to us?
That's what the current zoning regulation requires, correct?
Okay,
So they,
in other words, we would make that decision, and I swear we made it a couple times, maybe I'm...
yes, this commission has, since I've been staff here, we've been going backwards with approving easements and then going to the board of selectmen, the
We're
current.
going to change that around eventually so that it goes to the selectmen first before we make a decision as to whether they want it or not, and we make our decision on what they say. That's the way it should be done. And if it was done that way before, you wouldn't have that rocky hill coming down into the swamp. You wouldn't end up with that property. So what's your plan for the property that we already have that's down going to the swamp?
Well, that's a different issue. That's Gary's problem.
Yes, we'll get to it.
Procedurally, there are a couple different ways you can go with this. You can, you're required to have another public hearing on this particular application, although, since you are the authors of this, or you are the applicant in the sense for this particular proposed change, the commission can withdraw it, and we can redraft it and come back with a new application and schedule a public hearing, et cetera, and to sort of deal with all these things comprehensively. So that would be one option, or, you could waive the second public hearing and deny the application. That would be another option, but, or you could.
Given the number of changes that
Right.
it sounds like we need to work on, I'm inclined to suggest that somebody make a motion to withdraw it.
Or deny it?
I think withdraw it's, a little easier. Is it a semantics argument?
Simplest thing to do, I would think.
make a motion to withdraw.
I'll second that.
Questions? Discussion? All in favor of withdrawing the application?
Aye.
Motion passes. Anyone against? Abstain? Matt abstains, but... Okay. We continue. Thank you very much.
Just think we had too much time.
Just a bit. All right. Where are we?
Regularly approve. Well, someone like to approve the revised agenda. Make a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Deliberation, I don't believe we have any items to deliberate, correct? We don't have any items to deliberate. So site plan, Alan D'Antonio. Let me read it and then we can table it. Alan D'Antonio, 2311 Boston Post Road, map 78, lot 25, zone TS2, site plan revision for 25-seat Asian restaurant, existing building. Recommend that we table to the 20th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Subdivision, John and Kendra Remington, 190 Peddlers Road, map 73, lot 3-19, zone R5, subdivision map amendment to relocate driveway originally approved May 18th, to receive. Are we receiving and taking action? Just receiving? Receiving, are we going to put this on the schedule? Okay.
This is a subdivision that you approved a few months ago that was appealed, went to court, and the appellants and the developer and the town agreed on a revision to the subdivision plan that will result in the lawsuit being withdrawn, assuming you act on the agreed on change.
We'll receive and set for the 20th. Christopher Widmer, 376 State Street, map 74, lot 5, R5 subdivision, 4 lots. Receive on the 20th also?
Received
Just
now.
received?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's received.
Yep.
Applications to be received, coastal area management site plan, Mark Lazarus, 162 Daniel Ave, map 10, lot 164, zone R2, coastal area management, tear down and rebuild of a house on subject property, receive and request public hearing to be set for February 20th, 2019.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Town of Guilford, Park and Recreation Department, Chatfish Island Road, Chatfish Island Park, map 23, lot 5, zone R6, coastal area management to request to construct a 12 by 12 gazebo. Receive and request public hearing to be set for March 6th, 2019.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Town of Guilford, Falcon Road, map 2, Satham's Head Association, coastal area management to repair seawall along Falcon Road. Receive and request public hearing to be set for March 6th, 2019.
Second. Or, so moved. Second.
All in favor?
Moving things along.
Other Guilford Agricultural Society, Fairgrounds, 111 Lovers Lane, map 40, lot 138, zone R3. Request to add a wedding event on June 15th, 2019. Do we,
Is this come in advance notice timetable?
what's our current advance notice?
6 months.
So it doesn't, but.
Requirement, yes.
It does?
Very close.
About 4
Oh, yeah, June 15th, no.
Maybe 4 weeks.
Have we informed them of the usual, has to be concluded by X hours?
Do we have such a
Well,
requirement?
they're bound by the noise
Noise
ordinance.
ordinance.
Just for the sake of neighborhood harmony, if we could remind them of all that.
Okay.
So they can remind the neighbors, I think that would be great. And
Speakers pointing at the houses.
exactly, just, a little back and black. So, would someone like to make a motion to approve the addition of the wedding on June 15th?
So moved.
Second.
Questions, discussion? I mean, I think
We're going to approve the wedding tonight?
it's just the
Do
addition
you know
of,
how many guests or like, I
no?
don't know? Does that matter?
There's a noise limit.
Just so that we get the neighbors.
Well, we have
up
a,
and all.
there's a restriction on, that they're supposed to give us notice of what they're doing. So, and a list of events, which George maintains.
Technically, we're supposed to be checking this event against the list of events that they're allowed to have as well.
Correct.
Right, and they're within the less than 6 months.
So I've had a motion and a second to approve. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Abstentions? Against, okay. Motion passes. Approval of minutes,
For as much as there was, they proved to be substantially correct.
very good. Make a motion to approve the minutes? Anyone?
So moved.
All in favor? All right, thank you. Okay. Approval of bills, Guilford Courier, $126. Please pay the bills.
Motion, pay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
With no further business to conduct, we would make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you very
Good job,
much.
Mr. Chairman. In and out.